hear me?
Yeah.
So, envoys from Babylon. That sounds like a good thing to talk about today. We were talking about Hezekiah, and we're going to get to meet him again today. And this is all about Isaiah the prophet. Isaiah the prophet, who is the counselor to Hezekiah. And they, both of their lives were, in parallel, time-wise. Isaiah was about 20 years older than Hezekiah, but Isaiah was his prophet during the whole time of Hezekiah's life. So, what we're going to be talking about, envoys from Babylon. You really got to understand this Babylon-Assyrian thing in order to appreciate the rest of this lesson. So I'm going to do a little excursion here about Assyria, just so that we will kind of level the playing ground and you'll understand what's going on in Assyria. So here's a little chart showing how Assyria grew from somewhere in the 1350s all the way up to current times. And current times are 700s. All right? And so here's the little deal. If you see where number 1 is up there, that's where Assyria started out. Nineveh's in there. Nineveh's the capital of Assyria, stayed the capital the whole time. And it's that little old bitty place in there. That's where Assyria started. But then it grew and grew and grew. And in the number 2 section, the light green section, that was their first period of growing. And that was, and you can't read the stuff out there, but that was somewhere in the 1300s, even when the green stuff, when they expanded to fill in that green section. But that green section did include Babylon. Over a period of time, Assyria conquers Babylon, Babylon rebels. It goes back and forth over and over again for hundreds of years, actually 600 years here. And then you can just see these different sections get added on. Number 3 section is added in there in, I can't even read that myself. All right. But anyhow, they're about 100 years apart. And then you can just see the number 4 section is a different add, and the number 5 section. Number 5 is kind of when they start, I wish my glasses were better. They're not. Okay. Anyhow, let's get down to the time. You can see the later sections, the 6 and 7, start getting added on. So that's when Assyria starts conquering. They've conquered everything else, and then they start coming down and take over Samaria, which is the northern kingdom. And then number 7, they take over Judah, except for Jerusalem. They never do conquer Jerusalem. And we've had a previous lesson where we talk about Sennacherib, the head of Assyria, comes down in about 702, and he makes all these threats against Jerusalem, and he's going to wipe them out. And then what happened? God intervenes, and he kills 185,000 Assyrians in one night, and then that kind of stops that. And you know what? The Assyrians go away, and they never come back to Jerusalem again during the time that Assyria exists. They go and conquer other people. They go back and conquer Babylon again. They conquer Babylon over and over again. But let's talk about Babylon. Situation in Babylon, 729 BC. Keep in mind it's in 722 when they come and conquer the Samaria, the northern kingdom. So in 729 BC, Assyria conquered Babylon again. And they unified the 2 countries, Babylon and Assyria. But guess what? People in Babylon, they were not happy. They never really accepted the fact they'd been conquered. They constantly fought it. They rebelled over and over again. And every time they rebelled, the Assyrians came in and punished them for it and sent different people down there to run the country. And why did they fight it? Because, as in the second paragraph up here, it says that because the Babylonians actually thought they were better than the Assyrians. And they didn't want to be part of Assyria. They wanted their independence. They were a country with a lot of cultural pride. They had lots of monuments, walls, gardens, all kinds of things in Babylon. They just did not like the fact that Assyria was taking over and telling them what to do. They actually thought they were better and that they were the cultural center of Mesopotamia. And they resented the Assyrian dominance, and because of that, they kept rebelling. That's the issue. They kept rebelling. And if you keep rebelling, at some point in time you think, maybe I better get somebody on my side to help me with the rebelling part. Okay, in Judah, in 702 BC, that was what I was just talking about. Sennacherib comes in and he tries to, he does threaten Judah, but he also tries to take over Jerusalem, and he puts out warnings to Hezekiah, and then that's when God intervenes and he kills 185,000 Assyrians. And there's all kind of explanations about what might have happened. Maybe it was plague, because I can tell you, those guys, when you put a couple 100,000 guys out there in camps around a town, and you got all the rats and the infection and everything else, it's possible you could have plague or something, but we don't have the answer to exactly what it was, because God has a lot of tools that he uses, and who knows what tool he used, but God intervened. 185,000 people went away, and we give God the credit for that, as did Hezekiah and Isaiah. But because after they won this little excursion, a lot of people really thought, wow, that Hezekiah, he's got some allies there. He's able to fend off the Assyrians. Wow, maybe this is a guy who would be a good ally. And the people down in Babylon, they take notice of this. They notice that what's going on. So all of a sudden, about 699 BC, right after, they've been able to fend off Sennacherib, and 185,000 Assyrians die, and the Assyrians go away and leave Jerusalem alone. Then all of a sudden, Hezekiah gets sick, just a couple of years later. He's 41 years old, he gets sick, and like we said last week when we reviewed this, he prayed to God, intercessory prayer. He asked God to take care of him, and God did. God said, I'm going to give you 15 more years. Remember that from last week? So God relented, Hezekiah recovered, and everybody thought, wow, not only is Hezekiah able to fend off the Assyrians, he's faced with death, and he recovers. There are miraculous things going on in Jerusalem. People want to be friends with Hezekiah. That's maybe my simplistic view of it. They think there's some value in knowing Hezekiah, and well wishes pour in. In 699 BC, now we're all the way to verse 1 of chapter 39, and this is where our class begins. And it says, at that time, Marduk-Baladan, son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent Hezekiah letters and a gift, because he had heard of his illness and recovered. Well, that's real nice. Okay. And why? Okay. Down here, I did a little, checking out research on this stuff here, and when you go back and look at some of the historical things that are happening at the time, people thought that maybe that it was more than just gift card or a card that they sent him, Harry. That it was also, they were trying to become friends with him, because Hezekiah would be a great ally to have. And especially because the Babylonians hated Assyria, and they know that people in Judah didn't like Assyria either. They would be good, they'd be a good team, and those people in Judah, they've got God on their side. That's all that's a good match. And they're both countries, even though we know that the Assyrians never came back to Jerusalem, it was a constant threat. They could have come back. So, so they were a threat. They were a threat to Jerusalem. They were a threat to Babylon. It did cross my mind that what was the motivation of these guys coming from Babylon up there? And it says that they came up just to congratulate Hezekiah on his recovery, and to send him some gifts, and buddy up with him a little bit. But I thought, well, if it really was just congratulating him on his recovery, were any other countries doing it? And I did a little research on that and found out, yes, there were. A lot of countries were all complimenting Hezekiah. Probably not so much on his recovery. as it was the fact that he had won that issue with the Assyrians and had been able to cause them to go away, just a couple of years before he got sick. So there's a couple of issues there, but it was more than just the people from Babylon that were giving him a little thank yous for what was going on and giving him some recognition. But the fact that the envoys from Babylon came and did it, that was all a good thing. So Hezekiah, he has the guys come in. I kind of borrowed a Getty image here. I don't know if you can see it or not. There's Hezekiah up there showing all the guys from Babylon. Thought maybe it'd be nice to see kind of what they dress like. And I don't know, this isn't a real photograph here. Hezekiah didn't have his iPhone at the time. So it's somebody's imagination there about probably what that scene looked like. But it says in verse 2, Hezekiah received the invoice gladly, showed them what was in the storehouses, the silver, the gold, the spices, the fine olive oil, his entire armory, and everything found among his treasures. Why? Well, you ever have a company come over to your house and you show them everything you got? Show them the garage, show them your new Mercedes, show them all your things there, show them kind of how powerful you are. Maybe even show off your gun collection. I don't know. There are all kinds of things you can do when you have a company come over. And essentially that's what he's doing. Hezekiah is proud of all this stuff. I got thinking, these guys here, he didn't look at them as a potential enemy. He looked at them as another potential victim, like his country. They're both struggling to deal with the Assyrians. So I don't think he was really trying to prove that he was capable of defending, but there could have been a deterrent aspect here. When you show people your wealth, and it did say he showed them his armory, where they had lots of weapons. They had lots of weapons even left over from Solomon's time, golden spears and arrows and all kinds of things. They just lumped that into a one-word thing, his entire armory. But it was, the people in Jerusalem, they did have a lot of things in their armory at one time. So maybe there was a little deterrent aspect too in showing off what he was doing and what he had. But there was one other thing that was really important, and that is Hezekiah's got a lot of pride. He has a lot of pride in what's going on there, and it's nice. One thing I can remember when I was in the Army is that sometimes when you're the colonel or whatever, and you're showing off stuff, you got to remember it's not you. It's those people that are with you, all the troops, the people they're the ones that really make it happen. You get a lot of credit for it. And Hezekiah, I think he's gotten to the point here. It's maybe me, maybe me here. And I think God was noticing that as well. God was noticing. I think that plays a little bit in the story later on, is that God is noticing that pride is really taken over a little bit in Hezekiah's life. And that was why he humbled Hezekiah with the illness that he had in last week's lesson, was to kind of make Hezekiah sit back and think a little bit about just a human being here, Hezekiah. And you need to remember that God can help you. God can help you. He can help the nation. He can help protect the nation. But you got to ask him. Let's see. I call this the other side of transparency. There was nothing in his palace or in all his kingdom that Hezekiah did not show them. Verse 2. Then Hezekiah the prophet, then Isaiah the prophet, went to King Hezekiah and asked, "What did those men say, and where did they come from?" Hezekiah said, "From a distant land. They came to me from Babylon." Well, you ever ask your kids a question and you already know the answer to it? I think, I cannot believe that Isaiah didn't already know the answer to this question before.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I probably haven't done my homework, so I would know this, but maybe some of you could help me. Where does Mohammed come in to during this time period?
He's about 1,400 years later. It's a long time here. You know, because we got to go 700 years till Jesus gets here, and then another 600 years to Muhammad.
So Muhammad came after Jesus.
Way after, yes, yeah, 600 years after. Okay, we'll talk about that later. That's a good thing to ponder over later, but we'll ponder it later. Okay? So let's see. Then Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah. Where did those men come from? Okay, so he's asking a question. But he's, in a way, I think you have to ask yourself, didn't Isaiah, and for sure Hezekiah, already know the answers to those questions? Where did they come from? And I was surprised about the simple answer that Hezekiah read. They came to me from Babylon. If I was him, I would have been turning around and said, Isaiah, didn't you know that? You're the one who's always telling me what's going on in the world. I can't believe that you're asking me this simple question. Where did they come from? Why did Isaiah ask these questions? You know, if you go to the seminaries and you go talk to the theologians, they've agonized over this forever about what was coming out. And their conclusion was that this was kind of a classic prophetic interrogation technique to ask somebody a question that you probably already know the answer to, just to see how they will deal with it. But there were some other issues as well. One is that Isaiah wanted to see how Hezekiah would answer those questions. He wanted to see if he would admit to a few things. One is why is Hezekiah showing off everything and being kind to these people? Is he really trying to get an alliance with the people in Babylon? And you know what Isaiah does? Isaiah says, rather than going out here and looking for alliances with Babylon, you ought to be looking for an alliance with God. Turn to God and ask God to help you. Remember, we went through this entire same kind of situation with Egypt probably a month ago when we were doing one of the lessons. And it was the people were turning to Egypt. They wanted to have an alliance with Egypt. They were sending envoys to Egypt, trying to cut deals with the Egyptians. And Isaiah and God were telling them, hey, those guys are worthless. They're not going to help you. They can't. They're just not capable. So he said, turn to God. Well, here we are again. Isaiah is looking at this, what's going on. He's saying, you're out there thinking you're going to have an alliance with Babylon and save this country. You need to be turning to God. And when he asked these questions that we were just talking about, he's really wanting to see if Hezekiah understands this. Do you understand you need to be turning to God? And if you're not, he's saying you're setting the stage for some judgment. You're going to pay a price for this down the road. And it said here, set the stage for judgment. The exchange laid the groundwork to prophecy that the very nation Hezekiah was trying to impress would one day conquer Jerusalem and carry off his treasures. All right. In verse 4, the prophet asked, what did they see in your palace? They saw everything in my palace, Hezekiah said. There's nothing among my treasures that I did not show them. So you might ask yourself the question, well, why did he show them to him? I think he's proud. Hezekiah's proud, and he takes credit for being the king of the country that has all those treasures, being the king that has the temple, being the king that has God on his side. But he's saying, I get to wear a lot of merit badges for that. And he's really proud. And pride is something that bothers God and for which there are prices to be paid down the road. Let's see. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah in verse 5, hear the word of the Lord Almighty. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. Is that going to happen tomorrow or next year or whatever? No, it is going to happen, but it happens about 100 years later. because we're looking at the time frame of about 699 BC. It's about 597 or so is when the Babylonians come up, and actually, which is about 100 years later, that they actually come up and they threaten Jerusalem. And it's 586 when they actually come in and destroy Jerusalem and take all the people off in exile. So it's about 100 years later, this prophecy that Isaiah's just talked about, that's when it's going to happen. Not now, but in about 100 years. Okay, let's see. And in verse 7, and some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, who will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Okay, anybody remember any names? Daniel? How about Daniel? There's the Daniel, Meshach, Abednego, Shadrach, all those guys. They are actually in the line, and they when he was talking about some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, will be born, and they'll become eunuchs. And when he says your own flesh and blood, the kings are descendants of the current king. So Hezekiah has, Manasseh was his son, and then there are other kings on down the line. And finally, just before the Babylonians eventually do come in and take over Judah, there's a king Jehoiakim who's out there, and he is like he's the great-great-great-grandson of Hezekiah. So yes, all of this is going to happen. What Isaiah has prophesied here, it is going to happen. And probably when they talk about people will be taken away and become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon, that's what happened to Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those guys, they were taken in that first wave that was like in 597 BC, when the Babylonians first came in and they threatened Jerusalem, and then they actually cut some deals at that time. And the deals were, we're going to haul off a bunch of people, but they didn't destroy the town. They did come back later because the people in charge of Jerusalem kept failing to do things like pay their taxes and appeared to be subservient like they were supposed to. And they later just decided they'd come in and they destroyed the city and hauled everybody off in exile after that. Let's see. In verse 8, so what has happened here? Let me go back and just take one more look at that again. He says, and some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, will be born to you, will be taken away, etc. Okay? And then Hezekiah hears this, and then he says, the word of the Lord you have spoken is good. Really? Really? What he just heard, you would really say that, Hezekiah? That what you just heard, that is good? And but he goes on, it says, for he thought there will be peace and security in my lifetime. That's why he thought it was good, because he wouldn't have to face the problem. It's kind of like, I don't care if these politicians raise taxes, because the taxes never take effect during the time we're here. They're set to take effect during the next governor or next, 10 years from now or whatever, and it'll only affect my children and grandchildren. So I don't have to worry about it. I can kind of not go out and vote or not go run for office myself or do anything, because this isn't going to affect me. It's going to happen. It's going to affect other people. And I kind of think Hezekiah was kind of displaying a little bit of that kind of logic. It's bad logic, I think. I'm not happy with it. But he was saying, hey, this isn't going to affect me. It won't affect us during my lifetime. So I think I can live with what you said, Isaiah. Wow, that's sad, isn't it? That's kind of a questionable conclusion. The word of the Lord you have spoken is good, Hezekiah replied, for he thought there will be peace and security in my lifetime. That's what I just said. And then when it says, Hezekiah finds comfort in the assurance that there will be peace and security during his own reign, even though it means future generations will suffer. Okay? Okay, those seminarians and theologians and guys working on their dissertations at the seminaries, they all have studied this to death, and they had different opinions. Why would Hezekiah do this? Why would he think this? Is this even logical for somebody to think it? And so there have been different views that have come up, one of which was that it was just a selfish, callous view on the part of Hezekiah, and that kind of makes sense, because Hezekiah expresses relief that God's judgment will not happen in his own lifetime, and some view it as a moment of self-absorption and apathy toward future generations. Sounds right. That sounds like it was self-absorption to me. He's not worried. He's worried about himself, not about the country, not about the future generations. Then there's another view that said others like John Calvin and Matthew Henry see this as just submitting to a divine verdict rather than arguing with it. Okay, God put this out here. He said you're going to pay a price. Hezekiah was the one that said it's good. Nobody else said it was good. All right, but the fact that it was a divine prophecy there that they're just saying, hey. And I'm talking about guys like John Calvin and people when they read these commentaries and they talk about it, they just saw that it was a submission to a divine verdict. I think there is a big picture view here, and I did have to go do a little research to figure out big picture. I'm looking for good ideas how to say this. It says the biblical writers did not portray their heroes as flawless, did they? Even Solomon, one of the greatest guys, he asked for wisdom, but then he went and married. How many? Was it 700 wives and 300 concubines? Did he have? He wasn't flawless, okay. But they think Hezekiah wasn't flawless either. Hezekiah did do a lot of things. Hezekiah's overall legacy remains deeply positive. And I do, the people I got this from, I thought it was really good. They did go back and kind of put this in perspective. Hezekiah had done a lot of good things. Remember, it was good King Uzziah once upon a time, but then Hezekiah comes along and they say he's even better. He did lots of good things. He got rid of all the idols, got rid of the high places. He got the people back on the track of focusing on God. He just did so many good things. One of the greatest spiritual revivals in Judah's history. He eradicated idolatry, trusted God to deliver the nation from the Assyrians. But the last line there, Isaiah 39:8, simply reveals that even the best leaders are human and susceptible to moral flaws. Enough of this. I kind of wanted to add on a little positive note there about Hezekiah, because there's so much that's negative in this lesson there. How can a guy even think, about the conclusion there like he did? But at the same time, he has a pretty good track record in other places. So even if I blew this lesson, remember some of the other lessons where I did better, and try and put it in perspective. Okay. Let's see. Comfort for God's people. Next week, maybe that's a little more positive. Maybe that'll be a little more positive lesson. We're not going to be talking about Hezekiah next week. Comfort for God's people, where it reminds us of God's power, forgiveness, and faithfulness. That's what next week is about. If Hezekiah was around and if he had known Jesus, he would have sang this song. He didn't know Jesus, but he did know God. And I thought, this might be a good song for us.
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand.